My daughter-in-law slapped me and shouted, "You're dead weight in our lives. Go live in the dump." My son agreed. "I wish it had been you instead of Dad." At that moment, my millionaire grandson walked into the room and, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I never thought the words that would destroy me would come from my own son's mouth, but there I was, standing in the living room of the house where I'd raised him, watching as my daughter-in-law Kaya's face twisted with disgust. "You're dead weight in our lives. Go live in a dumpster," she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls that had once been filled with laughter when my husband Robert was still alive. The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. My cheek burned from the impact, and I stumbled backward, my 64-year-old body not as steady as it once was. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth where my teeth had cut my inner lip. "Kaya, please," I whispered, my hand instinctively going to my stinging cheek. I was just trying to help with dinner, but she wasn't finished. Her dark eyes blazed with a hatred that seemed to come from somewhere deep and poisonous. "Help? You call burning the potatoes helping? You call dropping dishes and forgetting to turn off the stove helping?" I wanted to explain that my hands shake sometimes now, that my memory isn't what it used to be since Robert passed 2 years ago. I wanted to tell her that I was doing my best, that I never meant to be a burden. But before I could say anything, my son Terrence walked into the room. My heart lifted for just a moment. Surely my boy would defend me. Surely he would tell his wife that hitting his mother was unacceptable. I looked at him with hope, this man I'd carried for 9 months, held through countless fevers, cheered for at every baseball game. Instead, Terrence looked at me with cold eyes I barely recognized. "Mom, Kaya's right. You're making our lives difficult." The words hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. "Terrence, honey, I don't understand." He crossed his arms, and I could see Kaya smirking behind him like a puppet master pulling strings. "I wish you had died instead of Dad," he said, each word deliberate and cruel. "At least he contributed something to this family. At least he was useful." The room started spinning. My legs felt weak, and I had to grab onto the back of the couch to keep from falling. These were the people I'd sacrificed everything for. After Robert died, I'd sold my little house across town and moved in here to help with their mortgage payments. I'd given them my Social Security money every month. I'd watched their kids for free while they went out. I'd cleaned and cooked and tried so hard to be helpful. "Terrence, you don't mean that," I managed to say, my voice barely audible. Kaya stepped closer to me, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at my face. "We've been talking, and we think it's time for you to go to one of those senior living places, you know, where they can take proper care of you." My chest tightened. I knew exactly what she meant. Not the nice assisted living communities with gardens and activities, but the state-run facilities where they warehouse people like me who have nowhere else to go. "But this is my home now. My name is on the lease." Terrence let out a harsh laugh. "Actually, Mom, it's not. We had you sign some papers last month, remember? You transferred your interest to us." The memory came back like a punch to my stomach. They'd told me it was just insurance paperwork, that it would help protect my assets. I'd been so trusting, so eager to help them any way I could. Kaya's voice turned sickeningly sweet. "Don't worry, Leona. We'll visit you sometimes, maybe on holidays." The mockery in her tone made my skin crawl. I looked around the room, at the pictures on the mantel that included me just 2 years ago when Robert was still alive, and I was still welcome at family gatherings. Now those same photos seemed to mock me. I was a ghost in my own son's house. "Please," I said, hating how desperate I sounded. "I have nowhere else to go. My friends from the old neighborhood, they're all gone now. I don't have anyone else." Terrence's expression didn't soften even a fraction. "That's not our problem, Mom. We have our own family to think about." Just then, we heard the front door open. Heavy footsteps approached the living room, and I felt a flicker of panic. Were they bringing in someone to physically remove me? Had they actually called the authorities? But when the figure appeared in the doorway, my breath caught in my throat. It was Marcus, my grandson. But this wasn't the struggling college student I remembered from 2 years ago. This was a man in an expensive suit, his posture confident, his eyes sharp and assessing as he took in the scene before him. Marcus was Terrence's son from his first marriage, a boy I'd helped raise when his mother had walked out when he was only 8. He'd disappeared from our lives around the time Robert got sick, and I'd assumed he'd moved on like so many young people do. "Well, well," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. "Isn't this interesting?" Kaya spun around, clearly not expecting him. "Marcus? What are you doing here?" My grandson's eyes moved slowly from Kaya to Terrence, then finally settled on me. What I saw there wasn't the indifference I'd grown accustomed to from my family. There was something else, something that looked almost like protection. "I came to check on Grandma Leona," he said simply. "Good thing I did." Terrence straightened up, trying to regain control of the situation. "Marcus, this is family business. Mom was just leaving." "Was she?" Marcus asked, pulling out his phone. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my grandmother just got assaulted by her daughter-in-law while my father wished she was dead." My heart started racing. Had he heard everything? How long had he been standing outside that door? Kaya's face went white. "You don't understand the situation. She's been causing problems, making our lives miserable." Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Oh, I understand perfectly. I understand a lot more than you think I do." Marcus walked further into the room, and I noticed something I'd missed before. The confidence in his stride wasn't just from maturity. This was a man who knew exactly what he was doing, who had power, and wasn't afraid to use it. "Grandma Leona," he said gently, turning to me, "are you hurt?" I touched my cheek where Kaya had slapped me, still feeling the sting. "I'm okay, Marcus. But what are you doing here?" I thought. "You thought I'd forgotten about you," he finished. "I know. That was intentional." Terrence stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "Marcus, whatever game you're playing, stop it. Mom needs professional care. We can't handle her anymore." My grandson let out a low chuckle that sent chills down my spine. "Professional care? Is that what we're calling it when you steal someone's social security checks and use their pension to pay your mortgage?" The silence that followed was deafening. Kaya's mouth fell open and Terrence's face went red. "I don't know what you're talking about," Terrence stammered. Marcus pulled out his phone and started scrolling. "Really? Because I have copies of all the bank statements, power of attorney documents you forged, insurance claims you filed in Grandma's name." He looked up, his eyes cold. "Should I go on?" My head was spinning. "Marcus, I don't understand. How do you know all this?" He walked over to me, gently taking my arm and guiding me to sit on the couch. "Because I've been watching, Grandma. I've been watching and documenting everything for the past 2 years." "That's impossible," Kaya said, her voice shaky. "You're just a college dropout who can't hold down a job." Marcus smiled that dangerous smile again. "See, that's where you're wrong. I graduated summa cum laude from business school 3 years ago. I started my own investment firm 18 months ago. We just went public last quarter." The room felt like all the air had been sucked out of it. I stared at my grandson, this young man I'd helped raise, trying to process what he was telling me. "You're a millionaire?" I whispered. "Multi-millionaire, actually," he said matter-of-factly. "And I've been planning this moment for a very long time." Terrence sat down heavily in his chair, running his hands through his hair. "Why? Why would you let us think you were struggling?" Marcus's expression hardened. "Because I wanted to see who you really were. I wanted to see how you'd treat Grandma when you thought there was no one watching, no one who could help her." My heart broke a little more. Even my grandson had felt the need to test my family's character, and clearly, they had failed spectacularly. "I've been depositing money into an account for you for over a year, Grandma," Marcus continued. "Money that should have been yours all along. Money that Dad and Kaya have been stealing from your Social Security and pension checks." "We weren't stealing," Kaya protested weakly. "She was living here rent-free. We had expenses." "Rent-free?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "She's been paying you $200 a month from her Social Security, plus another $800 from her pension. Not to mention the $50,000 life insurance payout from Grandpa's policy that somehow disappeared into your joint account." I felt sick to my stomach. Robert's life insurance money. He'd always told me that would be my security. My way to take care of myself if anything happened to him. Marcus, I said quietly, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you help me sooner? His face softened when he looked at me. Because you're the most generous, forgiving person I know. If I'd told you what they were doing, you would have made excuses for them. You would have said it was okay, that family takes care of each other. He was right. Even now, part of me wanted to defend Terrence, to say he was just struggling financially, that he didn't mean to hurt me. But there's something else, Marcus said, reaching into his jacket pocket. Something I think you need to see. He pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with wax. My heart stopped when I recognized the handwriting on the front. For Leona, from your loving husband Robert. Where did you get this? I breathed. Grandpa gave it to me the day before he died, Marcus said gently. He made me promise to give it to you only if things got really bad. Only if Dad proved he couldn't be trusted to take care of you. With trembling hands, I took the envelope. The wax seal broke easily, and inside was a single sheet of paper in Robert's careful handwriting. My dearest Leona, I read aloud, my voice shaking. If you are reading this, then our son has failed you in ways that break my heart. There are things I never told you about Terrence. Things I discovered but kept to myself because I didn't want to hurt you. I looked up at Marcus, confusion and fear warring in my chest. Marcus, what does this mean? Keep reading, Grandma. My eyes returned to the letter. I had a paternity test done when Terrence was 15, after I found some old letters his mother had hidden. Leona, my love, Terrence is not my biological son. The words hit me like a physical blow. I read them again, then a third time, trying to make sense of what Robert was telling me. His real father was a man named James Mitchell, someone your first wife was involved with before we married. I never told you because I loved you both, and I raised Terrence as my own. But I want you to know that my will, my real will, reflects this truth. Terrence had gone completely white. That's not possible. Mom, that's not true. But Marcus was pulling out another document. Actually, it is. And here's the real will. The one Grandpa filed with his attorney just weeks before he died. The one that supersedes the fake one you've been using. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. But what I saw there changed everything. Robert had left the house to me. The savings account, the investments, everything was mine. Terrence was mentioned, but only as a recipient of $10,000, enough to help him start fresh, but nothing more. This can't be legal, Kaya said, her voice rising to a near shriek. We've been living here for 2 years. We've invested in this place. Marcus stood up, straightening his tie. Actually, it's completely legal and effective immediately. The room fell silent, except for the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, about my place in the world had just been turned upside down. But for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel helpless. The silence in the room was suffocating. I stared at the will in my hands, Robert's familiar signature at the bottom, and felt like I was seeing my husband clearly for the first time since his death. He'd known. He'd known about Terrence's real father, about the financial abuse that would come, and he'd protected me even from beyond the grave. This is impossible, Terrence said, his voice cracking. Dad raised me. He loved me. He wouldn't have. Wouldn't have what? Marcus interrupted. Wouldn't have protected the woman he actually loved from a son who was bleeding her dry? A son who wasn't even his biological child but who he raised anyway out of love for Grandma? I looked at Terrence, really looked at him, and suddenly I could see it. The things Robert had probably noticed years ago. Terrence had always looked different from Robert's side of the family. His eyes, his build, even his mannerisms were nothing like my late husband's. But I'd been so in love, so grateful that Robert had accepted my son from my previous relationship, that I'd never questioned it. Mom, please, Terrence said, reaching for me. You can't believe this. I'm your son. I'm your only child. I pulled back from his touch, and the hurt that flashed across his face almost made me reconsider. Almost. But then I remembered the words he'd spoken just minutes ago. I wish you had died instead of Dad. You're my son, I said quietly, but that doesn't give you the right to steal from me. That doesn't give you the right to wish I was dead. Kaya, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly exploded. This is ridiculous. We've been taking care of you for 2 years. We've fed you, housed you, put up with your constant needs. And this is how you repay us? Marcus let out a harsh laugh. Put up with her? You mean put up with the woman whose Social Security checks you've been depositing into your own account? The woman whose pension you've been using to pay your mortgage and credit card bills? We had expenses, Kaya screamed. Do you know how much it costs to take care of an elderly person? The food, the utilities, the medications? Actually, I do know, Marcus said, pulling out another folder from his briefcase. Because I've been tracking every penny. You've stolen approximately $87,000 from Grandma over the past 2 years. The medications you claim to buy for her? She's been rationing her pills because you only fill her prescriptions every other month. The food expenses? You've been making her eat generic brands and leftovers while you two eat organic and order takeout. Each word hit like a hammer blow. I remembered all the times I'd skipped meals so there would be enough food for the family. All the times I'd suffered through pain because my arthritis medication was too expensive this month. All the times I'd worn the same 3 outfits over and over because they said we couldn't afford new clothes for me. And the best part, Marcus continued, his voice dripping with disgust, is that you've been telling everyone in the family that Grandma is losing her mind, that she's becoming difficult and demanding. You've been systematically isolating her from anyone who might notice what you're doing to her. My chest tightened as I realized the truth of his words. My sister Helen had stopped calling months ago after Kaya told her I'd been saying cruel things about her. My neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who used to check on me daily, hadn't come by since Terrence told her I'd complained about her being nosy. We never. Terrence started to say, but Marcus cut him off. Never what? Never told Aunt Helen that Grandma called her a bitter old maid who should mind her own business? Never told Mrs. Peterson that Grandma said she was tired of nosy neighbors bothering her? I have witnesses, Dad. I have documentation of every lie you've told to keep people away from her. I felt tears streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of rage. Pure, white-hot rage at the systematic way they'd dismantled my life, my relationships, my dignity. Why? I whispered, looking at Terrence. Why would you do this to me? I raised you. I loved you. When your real father abandoned us, I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. When Robert came into our lives, I made sure you knew you were wanted, that you belonged. Terrence's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like the scared little boy I remembered. Mom, we were drowning financially. The house, the kids' school, Kaya's medical bills from when she was pregnant with Lily. We just needed help. And you had all this money just sitting there, so you decided to steal it, Marcus said flatly. Instead of asking for help, instead of being honest about your financial problems, you decided to gaslight an elderly woman and steal her life savings. Kaya suddenly stood up, her face flushed with anger. You know what? Fine. You want the truth? Your precious grandma wasn't some innocent victim. She was driving us crazy with her constant needs, her forgetfulness, her complaints. Do you know what it's like living with someone who leaves the stove on and forgets to lock the door? Do you know what it's like living with people who make you feel like a burden for existing? I shot back, surprised by the strength in my own voice. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed the screen to Terrence and Kaya. This is a recording of what happened here 20 minutes ago. Kaya slapping Grandma. You telling your mother you wish she was dead. All of it captured in crystal clear audio. Kaya lunged for the phone, but Marcus was too quick. You were recording us? She shrieked. I've been recording every conversation in this house for the past 6 months, Marcus said calmly. Grandma gave me permission to install security cameras when I told her I was worried about break-ins in the neighborhood. She had no idea what I was really documenting. The color drained from Terrence's face. Marcus, son, please. Think about what you're doing. This will destroy our family. What family? Marcus asked, his voice ice cold. The family that wishes its elderly matriarch was dead? The family that steals from the woman who sacrificed everything for them? The family that systematically isolates and abuses someone who can't defend herself? I watched my grandson, this young man who had somehow become my protector, and felt a mixture of gratitude and heartbreak. He'd had to become the adult in a situation where the actual adults had failed so completely. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. Marcus looked at me with gentle eyes, such a contrast to the cold fury he'd been showing Terrence and Kaya. "Now you get to choose, Grandma. This is your house according to Grandpa's will. Your money that's been stolen will be returned with interest, and you get to decide whether you want to press charges for elder abuse and theft." The power of choice. When was the last time I'd felt like I had any real choices in my life? "You have until tomorrow morning to pack your things and leave," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Both of you." Kaya's mouth fell open. "You can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go? What about the kids?" "You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from me," I replied. "Before you decided I was dead weight that belonged in a dumpster." Terrence dropped to his knees in front of my chair. "Mom, please, I'm sorry. I was wrong. We were wrong. But please don't do this. We can work it out. We can pay you back." I looked down at this man who had raised his voice to me, who had wished me dead, who had stolen my security and my dignity, and I felt nothing but pity. "You had 2 years to work it out, Terrence. 2 years to treat me with basic human decency. Instead, you chose to abuse me while stealing from me. That's not a mistake. That's a choice you made every single day." The weight of those words settled over the room like a final judgment. The next morning came faster than I expected, but also slower than I'd hoped. I'd barely slept, my mind racing between disbelief at Marcus's revelations and a growing sense of something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee from my favorite mug for the first time in months. Kaya had hidden it away, claiming it was too good for everyday use, but Marcus had found it and washed it for me. Such a small thing, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The sound of suitcases bumping down the stairs interrupted my thoughts. Through the doorway, I could see Kaya struggling with a large bag, her face blotchy from crying. Terrence followed behind her, carrying 2 more suitcases and looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "Mom," Terrence said, appearing in the kitchen doorway, "can we please talk about this?" I looked at him over my coffee cup, this man who had once been my whole world. "What's there to talk about, Terrence? I know we made mistakes. I know we hurt you. But we're family. Surely that means something." The audacity of it took my breath away. "Family? You mean the same family bond you were honoring when you told me you wished I was dead?" His face flushed red. I was angry. I didn't mean it. "You were angry about what exactly? About having to share a house with the woman who gave up everything to raise you? About having to occasionally help the person who worked 3 jobs so you could have school clothes and birthday parties?" Marcus appeared in the kitchen, dressed in a crisp business suit. "The moving truck is here," he announced. "Right on schedule." Kaya spun around, her eyes wild. "Moving truck? What moving truck?" "The one I hired to help you move your belongings," Marcus said calmly. "Since you're leaving today, I thought you might need assistance." "We don't have anywhere to go," Kaya screamed. "You can't just throw us out on the street." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "Actually, I can. Because according to the lease agreement you signed 3 months ago, you've been subletting this house from Grandma, a sublet that can be terminated with 24 hours notice for breach of contract." "What lease agreement?" Terrence asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The one you signed when you thought you were transferring Grandma's interest in the house to yourselves. What you actually signed was an agreement acknowledging that she was the rightful owner and you were tenants. My legal team is very thorough." I stared at my grandson in amazement. He'd been planning this for months, maybe years. Every detail had been considered, every contingency prepared for. "You planned this whole thing," Kaya accused, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. "You set us up. I documented your crimes," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference." Terrence sank into one of the kitchen chairs, his head in his hands. "We'll be homeless. The kids will have to change schools in the middle of the semester." For a moment, just a moment, I felt my resolve waver. Those were my grandchildren too, innocent victims of their parents' greed and cruelty. But then I remembered something Marcus had shown me the night before, after Terrence and Kaya had gone upstairs. Bank statements showing that they'd been taking money from the children's college funds too, using it to pay for vacations and luxury purchases while telling everyone they were struggling. "The children will be fine," I said firmly. "They're young. They'll adapt. But maybe now they'll learn what integrity looks like. Kaya's face twisted with rage. Integrity? From you? You're destroying your own family over money. No, I said, standing up from the table. You destroyed this family when you decided I was nothing more than a source of income to be exploited and abused. I'm just refusing to be destroyed along with it. The doorbell rang, and Marcus went to answer it. I could hear voices in the hallway, then footsteps coming toward the kitchen. A woman in a business suit appeared, followed by 2 men in uniforms. Mrs. Morrison? I'm Detective Sarah Walsh with the County Elder Abuse Unit. My heart started racing. I looked at Marcus, who nodded reassuringly. We've received a complaint regarding financial exploitation and abuse of a vulnerable adult. Detective Walsh continued. We'd like to speak with all parties involved. Kaya let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. Oh, but it is, Marcus said quietly. Because elder abuse is a felony in this state, and theft of more than $50,000 is a federal crime. For the next hour, I watched as my life was dissected by investigators. Bank records were reviewed, recordings were played, photographs of my bruised cheek were taken. Through it all, Terrence sat in stunned silence while Kaya alternated between sobbing and screaming about how unfair it all was. Mrs. Morrison, Detective Walsh said finally, you have several options available to you. You can choose to press full criminal charges, which would likely result in jail time for both defendants. You can pursue civil restitution, which would require them to repay what was stolen, but might not involve prison time. Or you can choose a combination of both. I looked at Terrence, this man I'd raised, who had failed me so completely. Then I looked at Kaya, who had never once shown me even basic human kindness. I want full restitution, I said slowly. Every penny they stole, plus interest and penalties, but I also want them to face criminal charges for the elder abuse. Mom, no, Terrence whispered. Please, you made your choice when you decided to steal from me, I replied. Now I'm making mine. Detective Walsh nodded and signaled to her officers. Terrence Morrison, Kaya Morrison, you're under arrest for elder abuse and financial exploitation. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Kaya looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, Leona. We'll fight this. We'll prove you're not competent to make these decisions. Marcus stepped forward, his voice deadly calm. Actually, Mrs. Morrison, Grandma just passed a complete psychological evaluation yesterday. She's been deemed fully competent by 3 independent physicians. So good luck with that strategy. After the police cars pulled away, the house felt eerily quiet. I stood in the living room, looking around at the space that was mine again, truly mine, and felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just happened. Are you okay, Grandma? Marcus asked softly. I turned to look at this remarkable young man who had saved me from a situation I hadn't even fully understood I was in. I think I will be, I said. But Marcus, why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you let me suffer for so long? His face grew sad. Because I knew that if I'd come to you 2 years ago and told you what they were doing, you would have defended them. You would have made excuses, found ways to justify their behavior. You needed to see for yourself how far they were willing to go. He was right, and we both knew it. Even now, part of me wanted to call the police station and drop the charges, to forgive and forget and try to put the family back together. What they did to you was unforgivable, Marcus continued, and it was escalating. If I'd waited much longer, they might have tried to have you declared incompetent so they could take complete control of your finances. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Is that what they were planning? Marcus nodded grimly. I found drafts of guardianship petitions on Kaya's computer. They were going to claim you were suffering from dementia and needed a legal guardian. Guess who they planned to nominate for that role? The full scope of their betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just been stealing from me. They'd been systematically working to strip away my independence, my dignity, my very identity as a person capable of making my own decisions. But now, standing in my own home, with my grandson beside me and the truth finally exposed, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope for the future. 3 weeks had passed since Terrence and Kaya's arrest. and the house felt different. Not just quiet, but peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Marcus had hired a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who came twice a week and treated me with the kind of respectful kindness I'd forgotten existed. She never made me feel like a burden, never sighed when I asked for help reaching something on a high shelf, but peace, I was learning, came with its own complications. The doorbell rang as I was finishing my morning coffee. Through the window, I could see a familiar figure standing on my porch, shoulders slumped in defeat. My heart clenched despite everything that had happened. It was Terrence. I opened the door slowly, keeping the chain latch in place. He looked terrible. His clothes were wrinkled, his face unshaven, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look older than his 42 years. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. "Please, can we talk?" "Your lawyer told you not to contact me directly," I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "I know, but I had to see you. I had to try to make you understand." He looked down at his hands. "They released us on bail yesterday. The trial is next month." I studied his face, looking for signs of the son I'd raised, the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and tell me they were the most beautiful flowers in the world, but all I could see was a stranger who had wished me dead. "What do you want, Terrence?" "I want to explain. I want you to know that I never meant for things to go this far." His voice cracked. "Kaya left me, Mom. She took the kids and moved in with her sister in Nevada. She's blaming me for everything, saying it's my fault we got caught. Despite everything, a part of my heart ached for him. But I'd learned to recognize that feeling now, that automatic rush to comfort him even when he was the one who had caused the pain. "I'm sorry to hear about your family," I said carefully, "but that doesn't change what you did to me." "I know. God, Mom, I know." Tears started streaming down his face. I was desperate. The business was failing, the house was going into foreclosure, and Kaya kept pressuring me to ask you for money. But every time I tried, I couldn't find the words, so instead you decided to steal it. He flinched. "It wasn't supposed to be stealing. We told ourselves we were just borrowing it, that we'd pay you back when things got better. For 2 years, Terrence. You borrowed my money for 2 years while making me feel like a burden for existing. We never meant to hurt you." The words hit me like a slap. "Never meant to hurt me? You told me you wished I was dead. Your wife hit me. You isolated me from everyone I cared about and made me feel like I was losing my mind." Terrence stepped closer to the door, and I instinctively stepped back. "Mom, please. I'm begging you. Drop the charges. I'll pay back every penny, I swear. I'll get a job, work extra shifts, whatever it takes. Just please don't send me to prison." "Where will you get the money, Terrence? You just told me your business failed." His face crumpled. "I don't know, but I'll figure something out. Mom, prison will destroy me. I'll lose everything. My kids won't even speak to me anymore." The manipulation was so subtle, so familiar, that it almost worked. The implication that I was the one destroying his relationship with his children, that I was the one choosing to hurt him. It was the same pattern that had controlled me for years. "Your children don't speak to you because you committed crimes against their grandmother," I said firmly. "That's not my fault, Terrence. That's yours." Marcus's car pulled into the driveway at that moment, and I felt a wave of relief. He got out and walked toward us, his expression darkening when he saw Terrence. "What are you doing here?" Marcus asked, his voice cold. "You're not supposed to contact Grandma." "I'm talking to my mother," Terrence said, trying to sound defiant but failing. "No, you're trying to manipulate your victim," Marcus corrected. "The same way you've been manipulating her for years." Terrence turned to his son with desperate eyes. "Marcus, please, you're my boy. Surely you don't want to see me go to prison." Marcus's laugh was bitter. "Your boy? When exactly was I your boy, Dad? When you forgot my birthday 3 years in a row? When you missed my high school graduation because you were too hungover to drive? Or when you told everyone I was a disappointment who'd never amount to anything?" I watched this exchange with growing sadness. I'd known Marcus felt neglected by his father, but I'd never realized how deep that wound went. "I made mistakes," Terrence admitted. But I can change. We can be a family again. We were never a family, Marcus said quietly. A family doesn't steal from each other. A family doesn't abuse the most vulnerable member. A family doesn't wish death on the person who sacrificed everything for them. Terrence turned back to me, desperation clear in his eyes. Mom, he's turning you against me. Can't you see that? Marcus has money now, so he thinks he can control everyone. No one is controlling me, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. For the first time in years, I'm making my own decisions. But I'm your son, Terrence cried. Doesn't that mean anything to you? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with years of pain and disappointment and love that had been twisted into something ugly. Yes, I said finally. It means everything to me. That's why what you did hurts so much. Marcus gently took my arm. Come on, Grandma, you don't have to listen to this. But I stayed where I was, looking at Terrence through the gap in the door. Do you want to know what the worst part is? He nodded eagerly, as if my willingness to keep talking meant there was still hope. The worst part is that if you had come to me 2 years ago and told me the truth about your financial problems, I would have helped you. I would have given you every penny I had gladly, because I loved you, and I wanted to protect your family. Terrence's face went white. You would have? Of course I would have. But instead, you chose to lie to me, steal from me, and make me feel like I was worthless. You chose to solve your problems by destroying my dignity and my sense of security. I can make it right, he whispered. Please, Mom, give me another chance. I looked at this man who had once been my little boy, who I had protected and provided for, and loved unconditionally. And I realized that loving him didn't mean I had to let him destroy me. I gave you chances for 2 years, Terrence. Every morning when I woke up in that house, I gave you a chance to treat me with kindness. Every time you took my money, I gave you a chance to tell me the truth. Every time your wife was cruel to me, I gave you a chance to defend me. My voice grew stronger with each word. You had hundreds of chances to do the right thing, and you chose not to take any of them. So no, I won't give you another chance to hurt me. The hope died in his eyes. So that's it? You're really going to let me go to prison? I'm not letting you do anything, I said. You chose this path when you chose to commit crimes against me. I'm just choosing not to save you from the consequences of your own actions. Marcus squeezed my shoulder supportively. Dad, you need to leave now, before I call the police for violating your bail conditions. Terrence looked between us one more time, then turned and walked away. I watched him get into his battered old car and drive away, and I felt something break inside my chest. Not my resolve, but the last remnant of the guilt I'd been carrying. Are you okay? Marcus asked gently. I closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. I think I am. For the first time in a very long time, I think I really am okay. But even as I said the words, I knew the hardest part was still coming. The trial would start in 3 weeks, and I would have to face Terrence in court, knowing that my testimony could send him to prison for years. The question was, would I be strong enough to follow through when the moment came? The courthouse was intimidating in a way I hadn't expected. As Marcus helped me up the concrete steps, I felt the weight of every one of my 64 years. But when we reached the heavy wooden doors, I straightened my shoulders and walked inside with my head held high. The trial had lasted 3 days. 3 days of listening to lawyers dissect my life, my relationships, my failures as a mother. 3 days of watching Terrence sit at the defendant's table, sometimes looking remorseful, sometimes angry, but always like a stranger. Now, as we waited for the jury to return with their verdict, I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, my hands folded in my lap. Marcus sat beside me, occasionally checking his phone, but mostly just being present in the way that had come to mean everything to me. Mrs. Morrison? A voice called from down the hall. I looked up to see a woman approaching. She was about my age, with silver hair and kind eyes, but I didn't recognize her. I'm sorry to bother you, she said. I'm Janet Peterson, Mrs. Peterson's daughter? Your neighbor? My heart skipped. Oh, I remember you. How is your mother? Janet's expression grew sad. She passed away last winter, but before she died, she asked me to give you something if I ever saw you. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. She said to tell you that she never believed what your son told her about you not wanting visitors. She said she knew you better than that, and she was sorry she let him convince her to stay away. I took the package with trembling hands. Inside was a small ceramic bird, bright blue with delicate painted flowers. I remembered admiring it years ago when Mrs. Peterson had invited me for tea. She wanted you to have it, Janet continued. She said to tell you that real friends don't abandon each other, even when other people try to make them. Tears spilled down my cheeks. Mrs. Peterson had been one of my closest friends, and losing her companionship had been one of the cruelest parts of Terrence and Kaya's systematic isolation of me. To know that she'd never really believed their lies, that she'd thought of me even at the end, was a gift I hadn't expected. "Thank you," I whispered. "This means more than you know." The courtroom doors opened, and people began filing back inside. The jury had reached their verdict. As we took our seats, I caught sight of Terrence at the defendant's table. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of everything that had been revealed during the trial. When his eyes met mine across the courtroom, I saw something there I hadn't seen in years: genuine remorse. The jury foreman stood up when the judge asked for their verdict. In the case of the state versus Terrence Morrison and Kaya Morrison, on the charge of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, we find the defendants guilty. The words seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet courtroom. I felt Marcus squeeze my hand, but I kept my eyes on Terrence. His shoulders sagged as if a heavy weight had finally settled on them. On the charge of elder abuse, the foreman continued, we find the defendants guilty. Terrence's lawyer put a comforting hand on his shoulder, but Terrence wasn't looking at him. He was still looking at me. And for the first time in years, I saw the boy I'd raised looking back. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following week, and as the courtroom began to empty, Terrence's lawyer approached me. "Mrs. Morrison, my client would like to speak with you before sentencing. He's hoping you might consider writing a letter to the judge, perhaps asking for leniency." I looked across the room where Terrence stood in handcuffs, flanked by two bailiffs. "I'll think about it," I said. But I already knew what my answer would be. 1 week later, I stood in my kitchen, looking out at the garden Robert and I had planted together 20 years ago. The roses were blooming, their red petals bright against the morning sun. The house felt different now, not just because Terrence and Kaya were gone, but because it felt like mine again. Marcus had moved into the guest room temporarily, claiming he wanted to keep me company while I adjusted to living alone again. But I suspected he was the one who needed the company. Learning the truth about his father had been hard on him too. "The sentencing hearing is in an hour," he said, appearing in the kitchen doorway. "Are you ready?" I nodded, touching the small ceramic bird that now sat on my windowsill. "I'm ready." At the courthouse, I watched as Terrence stood before the judge to hear his fate. 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months if he completed a financial responsibility program and paid full restitution. Kaya, who had plea bargained and testified against Terrence in exchange for a lighter sentence, received 2 years of probation and community service. She'd agreed to repay her portion of the stolen money, though everyone knew she'd likely never have the means to do so. After the judge's gavel fell, Terrence was allowed one final conversation with his family before being taken into custody. I hadn't expected him to want to speak to me, but as Marcus and I prepared to leave, a bailiff approached. "Ma'am, the defendant asked if he could have a word with you." I found myself face to face with Terrence in a small conference room, a guard standing discreetly in the corner. He looked older than his 42 years, worn down by the weight of his choices. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've lost the right to call you family." I waited, saying nothing. "But I want you to know that I remember now. I remember how hard you worked to take care of me when I was little. I remember how you used to read to me every night, even when you were exhausted from working double shifts. I remember how you never missed a school play or a baseball game, no matter how many jobs you were juggling." His voice broke. Somewhere along the way, I forgot all of that. I let my problems and my wife's manipulation make me forget what kind of person you are. What kind of person you've always been. I felt tears pricking at my eyes, but I didn't speak. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he continued. "I just wanted you to know that I remember now who you really are." And I'm sorry I ever made you feel like you were anything less than the most loving, generous mother a son could have. The guard stepped forward. Time's up. As Terrence stood to leave, I finally found my voice. I do forgive you, I said softly, but that doesn't mean I'll forget. And it doesn't mean I'll ever again let anyone make me feel worthless. His eyes filled with tears. I understand. 3 months later, Marcus and I sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The house had been renovated with some of the money that had been recovered and returned to me. Fresh paint, new appliances, and a beautiful garden that Mrs. Chen had helped me plan. I got a letter from Dad today, Marcus said, showing me an envelope with the prison return address. What does he say? He's doing well in the financial responsibility program. He says he's learned to budget and manage money properly for the first time in his life, and he's been volunteering in the prison literacy program, teaching other inmates to read. I smiled slightly. That sounds like something the old Terrence would have done, the boy I raised. Marcus folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. He asks about you in every letter. He doesn't expect you to write back, but he wants to know that you're happy. And what do you tell him? Marcus looked at me, this woman who had become not just his grandmother again, but his friend and confidant. I tell him that you're more than happy. I tell him you're free. I thought about that word, free. Free from the constant anxiety of walking on eggshells. Free from the fear of being a burden. Free from the crushing weight of trying to earn love that should have been given freely. Yes, I said, watching the last rays of sunlight fade behind the trees. I am free. The ceramic bird on the windowsill caught the fading light, its bright blue color seeming to glow in the gathering dusk. Mrs. Peterson had been right about something else. Real friendship doesn't abandon you, even when people try to drive it away. And real family, I'd learned, isn't always the people you're related to by blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose to stand by you when everyone else has given up. Sometimes it's the grandson who spends years documenting abuse so he can protect you when you can't protect yourself. Sometimes it's the neighbor who leaves you a gift with her daughter, wanting you to know you were never forgotten. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about tomorrow, about next week, about the future I now had the power to shape for myself. At 64 years old, I was finally ready to start living. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.